Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. If you are watching us on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
Good. Hello.
Good. And we're joined this week by Rick Lindroth. Oh, did I say your name? Is that the right pronunciation?
Lindroth.
Lindroth. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. That's right. It's happened before.
Okay, good. So, or not good. I suppose I shouldn't be like cheering on people mispronouncing your name, but Rick is a distinguished professor of ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. During 2010 or between 2010 to 2016, he also served as an associate dean for research at UW-Madison. He is a Fulbright Fellow and a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Much of his research has focused on the impacts of climate change on forest ecosystems, but recently Rick was the subject of a Washington Post article that focused on the importance of faith in combating hopelessness when dealing with climate change, and we are happy to have you on, Rick. Thank you for being here.
Well, yes, thanks so much for the invitation. It's a joy to be here.
Yeah, I learned a new word actually just this morning that I wanted to try out on you, and I'm probably going to mispronounce this as well. But
okay.
Would you consider yourself a nemophilist? Have you heard that term before?
I'm sorry. No, you're going to have to explain that one to me.
It's a person who loves or is fond of woods or forests.
Oh. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to have to add that one to my
That's good.
biography.
You learned that one. That's messed
huh?
up. You're testing us.
Yeah, it was one of the like random words I get sent to me every single day from like dictionary, whatever. So I just thought, oh, this is fitting. It's like
perfect.
the clouds and the universe has heard what we're doing today and wanted to kind of give me something that I can bring to the conversation. So that's it. Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. And
yeah, we're done.
Yeah. No, but Rick. So tell us a little bit more kind of about your work and what it is that you do at the University of Wisconsin.
Right. So I grew up as a free-range kid. So basically, I lived in the country, and as long as we were home for supper and bedtime, otherwise we just had free range of the universe around us. And so I had a close connection with nature from the beginning, and knew by the time I was 7 that I wanted to be a biologist, and that's actually what I became. Graduate school in ecology at the University of Illinois, and then have been at the University of Wisconsin for my whole professional career. And my research group does research on global change ecology, forest ecology, plant, herbivore interactions, chemical ecology, kind of a range of things. But our global change research has been a major component of my program since like 1990.
Wow. So that's cool. So one of the reasons that the Washington Post did an article on you was because you were making a commentary about people of faith and sort of like the environment. So I was wondering if maybe you can kind of just summarize sort of the focus, and then maybe you can elaborate more on sort of your faith and how that kind of fits into sort of the broader climate conversation.
Sure. So that's a really complex subject. As people of faith, there are many reasons to believe that we should be at the forefront of caring for the environment around us, and yet, in many regards, we're bringing up the rear, if not inhibiting such efforts. And so, it's really a significant challenge. Now, of course, that's a subset of people of faith across the world, but it's an important subset. So in my own faith tradition, I grew up attending a Lutheran church, and then my wife and I have been attending various non-aligned churches. We currently attend a church that's part of the Evangelical Free Church of America. It's kind of the offspring of the Swedish Free Church many years ago. And I've been involved in that church for 20 some years here, 25 years. Actually, take that back, 35 years now, right?
Got it. Josh, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry about that. I got caught up. I was looking up Evangelical Free Church of America because I wanted to look at some of their theology, and then I was like, oh yeah, I got to ask a question. So no worries, man. So that's so interesting, Rick. I always, whenever I meet a scientist who's a Christian, it's always intriguing to me. I love science. My wife loves science. Actually, right now she's actually working on becoming potentially licensed to teach science in the state of Virginia in the high school level. So she is studying for her praxis and in a couple different subjects. So it's really cool, and we just love science. But there always seems like there's some kind of tension, between faith and science, which I personally think is much more propaganda than it is reality. But at the same time, I'd love to hear your sense of like, how has your faith interacted with the way in which you do your scientific work? And do you feel like, say, you can come to the issue of climate change, your expertise, among others, you could come to that issue with the proper amount of objectivity and neutrality given your faith? Because I'm sure there are some people that might question that, which I think is unfair. But what do you think?
Right. Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So some of your early comments about this conflict between faith and science, years ago we'd say that's a trope. Now we'd say that's a meme, right? It's got a lot more play, lot wider perception that it's true than what the science has indicated. Work by Professor Eklund and others has shown that actually many scientists, like up to half, have some faith perspectives, and so that there's this perspective that there's this clash between science and faith doesn't really stand up to the tests of science of sociology.
Wow.
That's really a bigger perspective here in the United States than it is elsewhere in the world. But yeah, there are some issues for sure. And being a person of faith in a world of science, the adage is if you try to build a bridge between two communities, you'll get stepped on from both sides. And that can happen a bit, but I've actually found within my own professional career and among my colleagues here at the University of Wisconsin, they may think that faith is antiquated or curious or out of date, but I've rarely met any kind of serious objection. In fact, I've said elsewhere, I've been quoted elsewhere as saying I've encountered more dismissiveness and pushback as a scientist in a community of faith than I have as a person of faith in a community of scientists. So that's really where the real challenge lies. Yeah. So there's a lot of crossover. I'm frequently asked, how does my faith influence my science? Just as you did, Josh. Rarely am I asked, how does my science influence my faith? And it cuts both ways.
Right. Yes, it does.
Both
Absolutely.
ways. So, as people of faith, one of the things that should mark us is we are pursuing truth. And it doesn't matter where the truth takes us. If we are committed to truth, that's how I approach my science as well. And my science informs how I do that with my faith. I don't care where the truth takes me with respect to my faith. I'm doggedly going to pursue it. And then somewhat reciprocally, there is this perspective of humility. As a person of faith, I'm humble about the world. I'm humble about my role in the world, my capacity to understand the world. I take that into my science as well. But also, my science tells me that because of the way I do science and the way most people do science, you're bumping up against the limits of what we know every day. Not only of what I know, but of what anybody knows. And I'm comfortable carrying around in my head multiple conflicting perspectives without demanding resolution. And that's somewhat rare within the community of faith. I don't have to have everything figured out. I'm actually quite comfortable with carrying around conflicting opinions in my head.
And that's more of a principle you would say maybe of science even.
Exactly.
Than of faith.
Right.
Right.
So how does this approach my climate change science? Yeah, there are a number of ways. I think, first of all, it's a very discouraging area of science to work in for many reasons. My faith perspectives help me to understand and not be surprised by the greed, the self-centeredness, the lust for power, the willful ignorance that I see in the world around me. And I kind of expect that from people. That sounds awful, but if we are fallen people, that's what you expect. So I'm not surprised by that. But then I think my faith also helps me to sustain some level of hope, even in the darkest days of despair. And I know that the work I do, I feel, is a moral calling, but that calling is not to be successful. It's simply to be faithful. And so if I can do the work that I feel I'm being called to do it well to the best of my ability, then I'm not really responsible for the results and changing the world. I just do what I can to the best of my capacity.
That's great, man. I love that answer. I was, as you're talking, I was thinking about several things came out to me as you were speaking that made me, that were surprising, that caught my attention.
Okay.
But one in particular was when you said that it's tougher, you face more controversy and conflict being a scientist in the community of faith than being a faithful person of faith in a community of scientists. Can you expound on that a little bit? What were you imagining when you're saying that? What's going on there?
Okay, I'm known as the science guy, as the climate change guy, as the eco guy among my colleagues, friends in my community of faith. And most of them are good friends. They're very respectful. My church is respectful. My church embraces science. We used to have a science symposium for a whole day where we went right at the big issues of, like evolution and climate change and medical ethics. And we featured prominent faculty who are professors and experts in these
fields.
Wow,
that's a great idea.
Oh, it's just
you just gave me a great idea.
Okay, hey, seriously, get back a hold of me and we can talk about that. It's had a huge impact. We draw from 700 people from southern Wisconsin, and just it's a great
Really? Yeah, I will connect with you. I'd love to hear how you do that. That's amazing.
Yeah. So, but, occasionally I'll get cat calls from the audience when I talk about, not cat calls, but derisive, not cat calls, derisive, shout outs from the audience when I'm talking. One of the evaluations one year I presented on climate change, and people give, their evaluations at the end, and they're anonymous, of course. And one time on one evaluation basically challenged the legitimacy of my Christian faith because of what I think about climate change. Wow. And another one was an offer of marriage. So, it runs the entire gamut between those two.
That was a cat call.
Yeah, you're right. And then, like one time I introduced a very well-known climate scientist before a public audience here in Madison and talked about some of my own perspectives. And afterwards, a person from the faith community in Madison approached me and shoved a bunch of papers in my face and said, you need to read these about climate change. It's bogus. This was back probably early 2000 teens. He said, if you believe in climate change, then you probably voted for Obama. And if you voted for Obama, you can't be a Christian. So, that's actually what happened. So you ask for, examples or why I think that I get more resistance in the world of faith. Yeah, those are some of the reasons.
I can relate. So I voted for Obama, and I was told that I wouldn't be saved because I was a Democrat. And
not just once, but twice he voted for Obama.
Yeah. So
my God.
So
it's like a circle of hell, like made for
special place for you.
Yeah, special place.
I mean, I'm one to just kick the doors of hell wide open and just be like, I'm here, I'm a Democrat, do with me as you see fit. But it wasn't as worse as like someone telling me because I was wearing a hat in church that, I wouldn't get to heaven either. But, that's a whole other podcast. But what I do want to level set a little bit, and talk kind of like, what is the state of our climate, and maybe just so we can get the terms correct. Some call it climate change, some call it global warming. What's sort of like the actual name of the change in the climate?
Right. So we'll start there and then work backwards. Used to be called global warming. Now, more generally, it's known as climate change because we know that the warming is doing much more than simply warming. There are all kinds of correlated impacts. And so climate change is the more appropriate term. So yes, the Earth is warming, but
less divisive term too.
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the Earth is warming. It's going to warm a few degrees. But if that was all that happened, that's not really a problem. It's all of the related consequences. And so because of that very marginal warming, we're seeing major amplification and increase in frequency of crazy weather events, storms, droughts, floods, massive wildfires. We're seeing sea level rise. We're seeing, changes in our seasons, rapid loss of glaciers, and we're seeing all kinds of effects. And so those would go kind of loosely under the rubric of climate change because they address all components of climate, which is not only temperature, but it's humidity, precipitation, the frequency and distribution of those events, etc. So it's more holistic than simply saying global warming.
Got it. And you're going to just sort of like, well, what's the state of the union for our climate?
Yeah. So, I've used this before. Other scientists have used it. I can explain the whole kind of perspective on climate change in 17 words. So here we go. And then we can pick them apart.
Okay.
It's real. It's us. It's bad. It's going to get worse. There's hope if we act now. So it's real. It's not fake. It's real. It's us. It's not other things. It's humans. It's bad. It is definitely bad, but it's going to get worse. And there's something we can do about it. We can fix it if we were to act aggressively now. So, the concept of global warming or climate change is controversial in many, many arenas. I mean, it's controversial in the world of commerce, certainly in the world of politics, in the world of faith. The one arena in which there is no debate whatsoever about the reality of climate change and that it is human caused is the world of science. So, I'm happy to talk about the science.
Yeah.
I can't really address, I'm not an expert in economics or in philosophy or commerce, but in the world of science, there is no legitimate debate that it is real, that it's serious, and that it's human caused. So that's the status. It's very serious. And the trajectory we are on is even more serious. So we can dive into that now, some if you want, or we can come back.
Yeah, let's talk about the science of it. I mean, there's a lot of myths, a lot of misinformation out there about the science. Sure. I think it'd be helpful if you can kind of address some of that. I mean, and sadly, it's like, during COVID, well, I guess we're still in COVID, but, there's a lot of conflicting opinions about what COVID is, the severity. You've got some doctors saying it's no big thing, others saying like you need to, get yourself in a bunker, and again, I'm not smart enough to know what the right answers is. I just find doctors and scientists that I trust and value and say, hey, what are they saying? And they're saying, yeah, COVID's bad. Okay, great. Then I'll wear a mask and I'll get the vaccination and I'll do all that kind of stuff. So I think it is important to address the science, and also maybe dispel some of the myths that you hear about the science. Sure.
So do you have particular components you want me to address, or I can just dive in?
So we're not environmentalists. So I'm not even quite sure like where to start. So maybe you can address one of the common things I hear is about the 1.5 degree change in global temperature is going to cause flooding all around the world or something like that. So maybe you can address that or start there.
Right. So the 2015 Paris Climate Accord was both a scientific but largely a political document among well over 100 nations that signed it. I can't remember. Nearly every nation in the world has signed it. 180, I can't remember. And it committed to an aspirational goal of limiting climate change by the end of the century to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that was the aspirational limit. The one they were all able to agree on was a 2-degree limit. Well, we've already warmed 1 degree of that 1.5 to 2 degree differential. So we're already well on our way there. And that warming that we've experienced is not a consequence of the greenhouse gases that we've released into the atmosphere over the last 20 to 30 years. Due to the lag effects that are built into our climate system, it takes the climate many decades, if not centuries, to fully adjust to the increase in CO2. So even if we were to stop emissions today, our climate would continue to change for probably 100 to 200 years into the future because of these long-term lag effects. 1.5 degrees doesn't sound like much, but think about the changes we've already been seeing. Last year alone, there were in the United States $145 billion worth of climate-related damage in 1 year. So we're seeing already extensive, magnified wildfires, droughts, floods, disruption, and it's not that those are going to continue increasing at the same rate as the temperature. Those get amplified, magnified with each increase in temperature. So it's not a linear growth, it's an exponential growth. So with every increase in temperature, we're going to be seeing a multiplicative effect on those various
Why is that the case? Why do we understand why it's amplified?
Simply, I think because, we've lived in a stable environment throughout human history, pretty much. And once you start destabilizing a system that has been in stasis for so long, every move away from that equilibrium contributes to an even greater amplification of diverse responses. Now, I can't get into the details of, kind of the chaos theory and other components that explain that. I'm not an expert in that. But it's been pretty well documented and anticipated. Yeah.
Then how about like the critique that the climate has always changed, or like it's natural. Yeah. I'm sure you've heard that one.
Yeah. Sure. I'll come around to that. I did want to mention also that the last time that global temperatures were at the level they are now, sea levels were 20 to 30 feet higher. And the last time that CO2 levels were as they are now, sea level was about 60 feet higher. So there again, that's that kind of, we're just anticipating, waiting for those to happen because of this log lag time for the climate to adjust. So, historically in the climate change debate, the denialists or dismissives first said climate change doesn't exist. And by the way, they copied and developed what's known as the tobacco playbook, the very same strategy that was used by tobacco companies in the 1950s and 60s to say that tobacco smoking was not dangerous to human health. So the big oil companies, it's well documented in historical records that this is the same approach that they used, and they had two different faces. Their scientists were telling, like ExxonMobil scientists were telling them one thing, and then the public face was saying something completely different. So they first said climate change does not exist. Well, then the evidence became so overwhelming that they changed what they're saying to, well, it may exist, but we don't know why. Because if we don't know why, that really negates any responsibility we have, right? We don't need to feel compelled to do something about it, and it's probably something natural. Well, now the evidence is not only that it exists and so compelling that it's human caused, that the major arguments now by the denialist camp is, well, it may be true and it may be human caused, but it's too expensive for us to address. So the argument keeps shifting through time. So we need to realize that. Yeah. So you bring up a common question. It's very true that the climate has always been changing. It's been changing since, the birth of this planet. And it's gone through much larger changes, not more rapid, but larger changes than what we're experiencing now. So what's the problem? Well, that's really a red herring. The problem is this: humans have never experienced a different environment in what we live in now. Everything we know about human civilization has developed under a very, very stable climate regime. So that's one issue. The climate has changed because of changes in solar radiation, changes in the Earth's orbit, changes in the Earth's axis of tilt due to volcanic activity, many, many different reasons why the Earth's temperature has changed. How do we know that the Earth's temperature has changed? Well, the work of scientists, right? The work of climate scientists. So why are we so readily willing to accept what they say about our historical climate and yet dismiss what those very same scientists are saying about the projected climate happening within the next 100 years?
Touche.
It doesn't make sense, right? And so not me, but climate scientists have addressed every one of those factors. And the only one that matches what we're seeing with our climate change is the accumulation of greenhouse gases. All of the other ones do not account for it. So that's, climate has always changed, yes, but now it's changing because of us, and it's changing more rapidly than it has throughout history, and the consequences will be severe.
Yeah, so my last question, kind of along this vein of questioning, is something that you hear a lot from my political camp, the Democrats, and that if we don't do something about the climate, basically we're all going to be doomed by like 2030. Like you see talk of this, like sort of like in the Green New Deal and other things. So what do you make of all that?
Well, 2030 certainly is an important mile marker, right? So it's not true, and you'll see these alarmist headlines, sometimes attributed to scientists, but I've never heard a scientist say that the Earth is going to be destroyed by the year 2030, or that somehow life is going to not exist, or humans will not exist. There's no scientist who's saying that. Media might be saying that. Media might be saying that scientists are saying that, but the scientists are not saying that. So, we need to be realistic here. And climate change is not going to be like falling off a cliff, right? All right, so we want to use metaphors. The horse is already out of the stable, and it's over the rise. There is no bringing it back. In our lifetimes, and in our kids' lifetimes, and in their kids' lifetimes, we will never again experience the climate stability that we grew up with as kids. That's just not going to happen. The horse is out. But that doesn't mean that we're just going to drop off a cliff at some point and everything is just going to disintegrate. There will be gradual but increasingly rapid changes. Everything we do now to mitigate or forestall climate change is helpful, and everything we do in the future will be helpful. The problem is that the longer we delay, the more serious those consequences will be, and the more difficult they will be to fix. And that's why this 2030 number keeps popping up. Go ahead, Josh.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So the 2030 year keeps popping up because if we're going to stay under that, I think it was the 2-degree differential, 2-degree set point established by the Paris Accord, we needed to cut our greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030. And that's a major undertaking. We're probably not going to be able to do it. Most countries are not on track to be able to do that. We're improving, things are improving, but they're not improving fast enough. So again, the longer we wait, the less we do, the greater the impact there will be on our kids and on future generations, and especially on communities of poor and disadvantaged people and racially non-white people. They experience the consequences of climate change more impactfully, even now, than do people that look like me.
Man, that's really powerful. So you gave us these words that were so memorable. I tried to write them down. It's real, it's us, it's bad, it's going to get worse. Yeah. There's hope if we act now. So you've kind of talked to us about it's real, right? That climate change is real. And I buy that. So the question is, and I think you're starting to convince us, but help me understand how it's us and it's bad. So give me some of the consequences, severe consequences, and help convince me, hey, this is a human-made problem. Here's what humans did. Like, trace me from my actions, Will's actions, all of our actions to here. Now we have this issue of climate change.
Right.
We are causing.
Right. Okay. Right. So, okay, I'll be very quick here, kind of climate change 101 or greenhouse effect 101. So, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, was around 270, 280 parts per million. That's important because even though that's a very, very, very tiny fraction of our atmosphere, carbon dioxide is one of the few gases in our atmosphere that actually absorbs heat. So light from the sun comes in, hits the earth, gets re-radiated back into space as warmth, as infrared radiation, and gets trapped by carbon dioxide. So as we increase CO2, that's adding more and more insulation to the Earth's atmosphere. It's like wrapping another blanket around the Earth. And so that's what's contributing to the warming. So right now we're somewhere around 410 parts per million. So we've seen a very significant rise from the ancestral, historic, roughly 280 parts per million.
It's doubled. And how long has it doubled? And so what's the period of time in which it's doubled?
So that was pre-industrial age. So,
okay.
What is that? Maybe mid-1700s or something like that. It's
gone up talking since then. 200 years or so.
Yeah.
And now
if you look at the chart,
where it's now doubled, and it's accelerating.
It's accelerating. So it's not a linear increase. It's a geometric increase. It's going up faster and faster. The climate change denial camp keeps trying to say, well, look, you haven't accounted for this or these other factors, and actually the scientific world has. What the denialists have not been able to do is explain how we could have increased CO2 and not have warmer temperatures. So they've not been able to explain how we can have nearly at least a 50 to 60% increase in CO2 and not get warmer. It's physics, right? It's pretty
and that 50
physics.
to 60%, that's established scientific fact.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
yeah. If you had the right instruments, I've got them in my lab. If you spend $5,000, you get one too.
Yeah.
There's no argument about that. Okay, and then the linkage to temperature has been done through lots of historical records, looking at how temperature and CO2 were coupled in the past, how they're coupled now. What do we know about the simple physics of CO2 absorption of heat and temperature? A lot of the mathematics of this were worked out way back in the mid-1800s, before there was any understanding of climate change. And so that's not new either. We've got scientists that have documented over 26,000 indicators that the Earth is warming. So we have rising sea levels, we have warmer air, warmer water, warmer land, changes in seasons, shifts in the distribution of species, the lakes that
26,000.
Yeah, 26,000. We've got 4 lakes that are really precious to the community in which I live in, and the ice on and ice out dates have been monitored for 150 years. And if you look at that record, there's a slow, steady decline and increasingly more rapidly decline in the ice cover in the historical records here from Madison, Wisconsin. So, there are thousands and thousands of indicators that all align with the Earth is warming. So, okay, and then I've kind of forgot where the rest of your question took us, Josh.
Well, it was and I know Will's got a question, but it's us. So we are producing the carbon dioxide that's warming, that's creating all these other subsidiary and ancillary issues.
Exactly. I forgot to mention, yes, it's the CO2 that is produced from burning of fossil fuels, right? So that is oil,
gas, oil, all that. Coal. That's the issue.
Yep, that's it. Right.
Well, so I have a friend who's Republican, but he also did 26 years in the Navy as a captain. And we were talking once about climate change, and he had told me that it was real, and I was sort of shocked because. I mean, here he was. I mean, this was like an ardent Trump supporter, Republican his whole life, but believed that climate change was real. And I remember asking him, like that's kind of a weird perspective to have. And he's like, "Oh, trust me." He's like, "Nobody in the Navy doubts for a second that climate change isn't real because, it affects everything: their mission, the sea levels, resources, stuff like that." It really got me thinking, and I'm curious on your thoughts about, do you find climate denialism, falls along certain religious or non-religious, or political, lines, and feel free to speak on as much as you feel comfortable speaking on that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, speaking of the Navy, that base in Norfolk, Virginia, right? That's going to have some real problems within the next, 20, 30, 50 years. And interestingly, if you were to think of, usually we align climate change denialism with conservatism, right? Okay, and I'll come back around to that. And if you were to think of the singularly most conservative agency or component of the federal government, what would you normally think? I'd say military, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. The top brass of the military, generals and others, have produced a number of reports saying that climate change is real, it's human caused, and it's a threat to national security, and we need to deal with it. So, I'm fully on board with what the military is saying about climate change. Okay, so it's really interesting when you look at denialism or dismissiveness about climate change, because it does fall out with very clearly along some demographic lines. So if I was to say what demographic marker is the best indicator of climate change denialism, what would you think it would be? And by a demographic marker, I would say level of education, race, religion, age, politics, where you live in the world, your social economic status, all of those. What is the best predictor of climate change denialism? Most people, when I ask that in a public audience, will say education.
Yeah, I would guess white, Republican, on a high school education.
Okay, good. How about you, Will?
Oh gosh, I would say Republican Christian. I'm not even throwing race in there because I mean there are plenty of like black conservatives that also think that climate change is a hoax.
Yeah. Well, let's take education as an example because that's one that pops up regularly. Interestingly, the data show that if you're a Democrat, the more educated you are, the more likely you are to align with the scientific consensus on human-caused climate change. But interestingly, if you're a Republican, the more educated you are, the less likely you are to align with the scientific consensus. So that's really interesting. But really, the best single indicator of climate change dismissiveness or denialism is political affiliation. Not even political ideology, it's political affiliation. In other words, it's the party that I belong to that determines my perspective on this important issue. Not even the ideology of the party, but simply party affiliation. You mentioned religion. You are right that white evangelicals are among the most dismissive about climate change. The sociological data show that. And so for a while, there is this perspective that religion or belief in religion or religiously conservative people are bad in terms of our efforts to care for the earth and address climate change. Further sociological work showed that no, it actually has nothing to do with their religiosity. It just so happens that evangelicals tend to be old and conservative. And those are the drivers of their perspectives on climate change, not the fact that they happen to be religious people. So it's really aligned with politics, and it comes around to something maybe we'll come back around to talk to, but it's one of the big issues with addressing, one of the big obstacles with addressing climate change is tribalism. Frankly, and you guys deal with that with every podcast. The polarization in America, and it's I'm going to adopt the view of my people, right? And so, study upon study has shown that for humans making decisions, it's more important for us to belong than to be right. More important for us to belong than to be right. We'll see that with our kids making bad decisions so they fit in with their group. But we do it all the time, right? We want to we want to fit in with our tribe, whoever that tribe is.
Yes.
And we will choose fitting in over being true about really important stuff like climate change. So I'm kind of rambling on here.
No,
I want to follow up with anything?
Yeah. It's, so it's our green, it's happening. We know the climate change is happening. I guess the thing I was mentioning before about how it's less divisive is it's more like everyone can acknowledge the climate's changing because things change. But the question is, what does that change? And it's real, so it's happening. It's us, so it's as a result of our collectively our greenhouse gas emissions, which is so primarily fossil fuels, right? That's it's our consumption and the exhaust that comes out of the use of fossil fuels. So I got you there, and and this is really good. It's bad, and it's going to get worse. Tell us how it's bad right now, and then what are the models as to how it's going to get worse?
Right. So, the research has shown that there is a strong inverse correlation between people's personal experience of climate change and socioeconomic status. So I don't know what your socioeconomic status is, Josh, but on a worldwide basis, if you aren't personally experiencing climate change, it means that you are better off than most people. So what the data show is the people who are experiencing the impacts the most are those who are poor and under-resourced throughout the world. So those are the ones who are experiencing more prominently the consequences of amplified hurricanes, floods, droughts, etc. It's pretty clear that climate change has already contributed to civil strife and war and is magnifying those throughout Africa. We can talk about Ethiopia, talk about the Congo, Sudan. Drought-driven famines lead to civil strife, lead to wars. most of those over the last 10 to 20 years have been linked at least to some component of being magnified by climate change. So those are very serious, right? Think about what I was thinking. Will lived in California. Apparently, you don't. You're on the safe and secure East Coast, at least for now. But think about what the wildfires have been doing in California. My sister-in-law and her husband and family live in Santa Rosa, and they were within feet, and I mean feet, of losing their house during one of the last major firestorms. Now, that doesn't mean it's caused by climate change, but it's pretty clear that what climate change is doing is amplifying and magnifying a lot of these other events. So wildfires are increasing. Hurricanes are not more abundant, but they're larger, they're more impactful, and they last longer, they're more damaging. So, as Will said, I was the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences here at Wisconsin for a number of years. Everywhere I went for 6 years across the nation, deans of research in ag colleges were talking about how are we going to feed a population of 9 billion people by 2050 in the face of climate change. So agricultural disruption is currently real, and it's going to get worse. Think about water. Think about the long-term drought that the Southwest is in, and the very serious consequences that drought and lack of water are going to have for California and the western states. And then with the Himalayas, I think the Himalaya systems and the rivers that run out of the Himalayas nourish, 1/4 to 1/3 of the world's population. And when those glaciers are substantially gone, what's going to happen, right? So it is bad now. If we don't think it's bad, it's because it's probably not affecting us personally. But it's going to get much worse. All of the models indicate that all of these things are going to become further amplified, further magnified, more frequent, more abundant in time.
When you say like it doesn't affect us, like I don't know, like I've heard it said that maybe COVID, could have been the result of climate change, maybe the strain of bird flu that's going around the globe, killing all these poultry or birds or what have you. Like is that one way in which like we can feel climate change?
Yeah, and I didn't even. Good point. I didn't even address the health consequences, but major medical communities are now publishing kind of white papers and saying that climate change is a very serious threat to human health. We can talk about the emergence of infectious diseases, and so vector-borne diseases, things like malaria, tick-borne diseases, etc. Those are increasing throughout the world. Malaria is definitely making a comeback, and part of that is climate-related. If you think about the tropics, where malaria has been a problem historically, many of the major cities were built at elevations just slightly above kind of the normal range of mosquitoes throughout the tropical regions. Well, now the mosquitoes' ranges are drifting, moving upward in altitude, and they're adapting, expanding their ranges as well. So the emergence of new serious infectious diseases coupled to climate change is a very, very real problem. And then there's just the straight up impacts of warming itself, especially in large metropolitan areas. A few years ago, Chicago had a massive heat wave, but think about what happens in New Delhi or Bangladesh or other places when they have massive extended heat waves. I just read recently developing in Pakistan. So just the direct effects of heat can be significant itself. So the thing about climate change is that it's a threat multiplier and it's a threat magnifier. People are not going to be dying of a 1.5 degree change in temperature, right? But it multiplies other problems. And so if we have climate change, it's then bringing on consequences for food production, for national security, for our infrastructure, right? And then it magnifies those. It's making our storms worse. It's making them more abundant. It's making our wildfires much more dangerous, much more impactful than they had been historically.
Man, that's it's sobering. It's
very sobering. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess so. So one of the things that obviously that we hold on to, all three of us on this call, is that we have hope. We have hope in eternal life. We have hope in Christ. We have hope in the future. Is not, though it may look very dismal, is not hopeless, and we believe that God will create a new heavens and new earth. I guess my question is that what is our hope right now? What can we do? And how does this integrate again into how does your theology of where this is all ending up maybe integrate into where you are right now, and how you give a message of hope amidst all this disturbing data?
Yeah, it's really important to not just leave the discussion at the point where we've arrived to now, because despair can be paralyzing, and despair is as destructive to our future as is denial, right? So we need to have hope, and there's reason for hope. There are a number of really good reasons to be hopeful about the future. One is we know what the problem is, and we know how to fix it. I mean, isn't that great news? What if we didn't really know what was causing this, or if it was beyond our ability to fix? That would be bad news. But no, it's good news. We know what the problem is. We know how to fix it. There have been multiple roadmaps, sophisticated roadmaps developed as to how to get from here to there, how to meet those Paris Climate Accord objectives. And so we know not only what's causing it, we know how to fix it, and we know how to get there. And so those are all great reasons for hope. I'll refer you to one website in particular. It's, if you were to go on Google and type in drawdown.org, it's Project Drawdown, and they are the world's leading provider of climate change solutions across virtually every sector of society that you can imagine. Education, health, infrastructure, agriculture, you name it. And it's extraordinary. We've got solutions. So we know what the problem is. We know how to fix it. We simply lack the political and personal will to do so. That's what's sobering. Somehow we have to get over that hurdle. And that's, for me, as both a Christian and as a scientist, where I can sometimes experience very significant discouragement and frustration. I'm reminded of two things, though. One, there is this, in the psychological literature, there is hope theory. And what hope theory says we need to be hopeful people, and that's very important for our psyches, is we need to have a vision of a better future. We need to have a path toward that vision, and we need to have agency in executing that vision. So we need to have a vision, we need to see a path, and we need to have agency. We've got all of those with respect to these issues, right? The one that is hampering us now is that of agency. We just don't have enough people on board. I'm also reminded of St. Augustine, who in the 400s is attributed with saying, "Hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger to see things as they are, and courage to see that they don't remain as they are." So when I think about hope in the context of climate change, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm furious, and hopefully I'm also courageous that, okay, they don't have to stay as they are, we can do something about it. So I kind of hold those in tension. I don't see hope as this kind of airy-fairy optimism, this Pollyannish idea that somehow everything is just going to work out okay, because it's not. But we can engage in activities to bring into effect that vision of the future that we hold. Richard Buckham is a theologian who's addressed this issue of hope with respect to environmental problems. And he writes about proximate hope and ultimate hope. Proximate hope is what we do now toward the betterment of our earth and humanity now. Proximate hope is always uncertain, and it needs to be reasonably based and thoughtfully pursued, but the outcomes are not guaranteed. But that's what we do as believers, right? We engage in all kinds of things where we don't have a guaranteed outcome. We try to address the needs of those who are poor in our community. We try to do, whatever we can do to make this a better world, to help people to flourish. But those are not guaranteed. And then, as you alluded to, Josh, Christians believe that at some point an end time will come and the earth will be restored. And that's the ultimate hope. So, yes, as believers, we can anticipate and look forward to that day. I don't think that gives us an excuse for not doing something now for multiple reasons. One is the earth doesn't belong to us. It belongs to God. It exists for His praise and His glory, and we've been charged to take care of it. And secondly, we've been charged to care for those who are poor and under-resourced around us, and we cannot do so without caring for their climate. So, we can't just wait for the ultimate restoration of all things.
That's awesome. Yeah, on this program, Josh and I really like to say, that'll preach, and I would say like what you just said, that'll preach. So one last question, just kind of staying in that same thinking about hope is like what can average everyday people do, and we'll even though we've got a diverse and global audience, but like we'll just keep it to America. So like what can Americans do to
Right.
I don't know, like help? I mean, I've heard it said a couple different ways. One, like it's not really like me putting a soda can into the recycling bin probably isn't going to change much, but me
Right.
electing people in office that
Right.
care about these things, would have a much greater significant
Right.
impact. So
Right.
what are your thoughts?
Right. Great question. We, and my family and I, have done progressively more and more for the last 20 to 30 years because of our concern about lowering our climate footprint, lowering our ecological footprint. Things like insulating our house, buying high efficiency appliances, driving less, biking, all kinds of stuff. We recently invested in a $13,000 heat pump furnace system so that we can consume less natural gas in heating our house and less electricity in cooling our house. $13,000. And then I'm going to say that none of what we've done will have any impact whatsoever on climate. Right? So we're fully aware of that. Why do we do it? We do it because we feel it's the morally right thing to do. We do it because it serves as a model and an example. And even though one person's efforts are not going to have any impact whatsoever, aggregated efforts, influenced and empowered, impelled by examples, will have an impact. And because I'm confident that these are small steps that hopefully in aggregate can have an impact in the future. So small steps, yes, individually are not going to have an impact, but collectively they can. That said, we need to be really careful here about pushing the responsibility onto individuals. And I know this is a political debate as well. The left wants to say we need systemic government control, and the right wants to say, no, we need to leave it up to individuals. Well, that is a faulty argument. It's a choice between two options, and you don't need to choose either or. In fact, we need to choose both. We need both systemic action and we need personal responsibility. But We will never get there relying only on the personal goodwill of individuals. Think about, I'm old enough, you guys may not be. I'm old enough to remember that in the 1960s and early 70s, rivers were catching on fire. We had terrible water pollution, bad air pollution. We had acid rain. We had all kinds of very significant environmental problems. Republicans and Democrats came together with bipartisan agreements and passed a number of major federal laws, and a number of these issues were largely cleared up. Now, they're not necessarily gone, but there have been many serious environmental problems that are way less serious today, and some that will likely go away, like the ozone hole and issues about that. If you think about all of this environmental improvement, how much of it has come without federal legislation? Zero. Yeah. Zero. So this idea that we, okay, climate change is serious and we need to do something about it, but let's leave it up to the goodwill of the people. We don't want government overreach. We don't want government involvement. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So we need both. Yeah, we need both. Okay, so take it from there. Where do you want to go?
Well, I was going to say, so we didn't really talk about it much, but a lot of people forget that the EPA became a department of our government, signed under a Republican
president.
President. So, it's weird how sort of things have changed over time and shifted, and we've discussed this on a number of different shows about just sort of the shifting influence and matters of importance for each political party. But Rick, just thank you so much for coming on the show to chat with us. This was a fun conversation. I'm really glad that we had a chance to speak with you.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on. I do want to say quickly one more thing. I did not actually give examples of what people can do, but there are all kinds of websites that will help you to do so. Simply go on and Google something like 50 things I can do to slow climate change, and there are all kinds of opportunities will pop up. And I want to thank you guys for addressing. This is an extremely important topic. I, of course, am very concerned about it, but whether or not we like it, it will be impacting all of our lives very seriously in the coming future. So I appreciate the fact that you guys are taking this on and doing it in a very respectful and politically divergent way. So thanks for your efforts.
Thank you. Yeah, we really enjoy doing that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask Josh this question, kind of put him on the spot, because Josh comes to us as the token Republican conservative. Climate change is a hoax kind of thing. I'm just joking, but maybe, I don't know. Like, so Josh, did Rick manage to shift your view about the climate any during our conversation?
Oh yeah, definitely. No, it was really good. Really good to hear someone talk about it who knows what they're talking about and has belief. You know.
So that's I'm really glad to hear that, Josh, and thank you.
Yeah.
Something that us in science need to remind ourselves of, and people in science communication have learned but need to remind themselves of, is the problem with science denialism is not an information deficit. It's a trust deficit.
That's really good.
And you just said that, Josh. You didn't need more information. You needed somebody that you could respect and trust, and all of a sudden that's opened your mind. And so, there is no one bit of information that is going to change the opinion of any climate change dismissive or denialist. What we need is to build trust and to build across shared values, across shared ideologies, of shared worldviews. And that's, I think, the best opportunity for a path forward.
It's so good.
Well, on that note, thanks again, Rick, for everything. And thank you for our listeners and viewers. And we will speak to you all next week. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.